Alright, so before we get started here, I just want to kind of set some kind of like ground rules in a sense. One, I'm going to try to give 15 minutes at the end for any questions and comments and stuff like that. I appreciate interactive engagement, so things like that. So even if you have a question in the middle of it, raise your hand, and then if it's something that I know I'm going to get to, then I might, just pass, or I will answer the question here and there, okay? Alright, so with that being said, hello everyone. My name is Odysseus, from New York City, and I first started off, well, not first started off, but I do Lindy hop. I've done that longer than blues dancing, and I consider myself a Lindy hopper that knows how to blues dance really well. I have been doing this dance since 2000, literally, since 2000, and I was in the middle of the whole dumpster fire that was going on around Kissimmee, if you guys know that name or recognize that name. And this talk kind of came out of the constant back and forth between European dancers and specifically messaging me in private or just saying in the message boards how blues and jazz music doesn't belong to a culture because everybody participates and shares in it. And at the time, I never really quite didn't know how to, that didn't sit well with me, and I really didn't know why at that time. But the more research that I did and the more information that I gathered, just really 2 years ago, it really just clicked on why, as a representative of Black American culture and other Black American people, we have such a strong connection to the music and dance that's always came out of Black American culture. And whenever you attend a lot of dance events, it always sheds lights on all the positive aspects of that time period of the 20s and 30s and 40s, which is absolutely deserving. But we really neglect to understand that some of the real life situations that our iconic blues and jazz musicians had to live through every day wasn't so great. And to understand that everyday life affected how Ella Fitzgerald sang her songs, how Billie Holiday sang her songs, how Louis Armstrong and Chip Webb and Duke Ellington played their music, right? How Frankie Manning and Norma Miller and Leon James expressed themselves through dance, and Ethel Waters, right? So this talk is really to understand culturally why blues and jazz music belongs to Black American culture. And to get into that, we have to first talk about how enslaved Africans were dehumanized, stripped of individuality, and made into property. And to be able to do all of that, we have to look at the politics that went around to governing and controlling Black bodies, right? It starts off with the laws. For those in the back that can't see, so I know the clarity is a little hard to see the further back you are, but to be able to understand that, we have to talk about 1619, August 25th, with the first 20 enslaved Africans brought to the American colonies at the time, right? And before I continue any further, it's really important for me to say, everything that you're going to hear tonight is from my own personal understanding, from the things that I've researched, right? In no way am I speaking for all of Black American culture or all Black American people. This is just my way to help everyone else understand culturally Black American culture better, right? So with that being said, moving on to the next event, Bacon's Rebellion. So this rebellion, I find this rebellion kind of pivotal in the whole how slavery became an institution in America. If you're not familiar with this particular rebellion, basically the poor people of the colonies at the time, white, women, Native Indigenous people, free black people, kind of rose up against the colonial elites, right? And 3 people were primarily in charge of this revolt. And the aftermath of it was 3 people were charged, and one of the three people was a black man named John Punch, and the punishment for these three individuals was this: the two white males that were involved in this just got an additional year of indentured servitude, but John Punch, his punishment by the Virginia law at the time said that he had to be enslaved for the rest of his life. And that is one simple little catalyst. So then by January 1st, 1641, Massachusetts became the first colony to actually legalize the institution of slavery into a document called the Massachusetts Bodies of Liberty. And then later subsequent laws like the Virginia Assembly Partis Secretur Ventrum specifically said that, I have it right here, yes, specifically ruled that the mother's race of a child would determine whether or not the status of the kid was free or not, right? And all of these things was slowly kind of like a catalyst of the institution of American slavery. Moving ahead, a couple of hundred years, we have a decision called the Dred Scott case, which we all hopefully should have at least had a touch on in our history classes in school. And that case in particular, Dred Scott, was basically, the individual Dred Scott was a free black man, and he wanted to buy the freedom for himself and his family. And at that time, the territories of Illinois and Wisconsin were free territories. And the rule at that time was if any enslaved person went into a free territory, they could no longer be enslaved going back to a slave territory. So when this court decision went to the Supreme Court, Roger Taney, this awesome individual, specifically had a ruling that said Scott did not have the standing to sue because whether enslaved or free, black people were not citizens of the United States, right? And then he decided to double down on that statement by saying black people are not included and were not intended to be included under the word citizens in the Constitution and can therefore claim none of the rights and privileges which that instrument provides for and secures to the citizens of the United States. So furthering this whole notion that black people are not citizens. Then he tripled down on his statement by saying when the Constitution was framed and adopted, black people had no rights which the white man was bound to respect. And reading that, you're just like, wow, okay, what do you do with that, right? And it's the slowly chipping away of the individuality, of the human aspect of things. Now, obviously, this case was not way after, because it was still during American slavery. So other forms of stripping the individuality of black bodies were, as we know on plantations, branding the slaves on the plantation of like, this is the property of this plantation, right? Having one own tribal or ancestral name taken away and replaced with a Christian name. Slave codes were introduced, which were laws that regulated, where a slave could go, and it was a law actually that was adopted from British colonies at that time, like British colonies laws, since the colonies were still closely linked to the British Empire at that time. Next, not being able to leave the plantation without a company from a white person or having written notes saying who you belong to. Not being able to meet up in large groups unless a white person was present, and also not having innovative or ownership of any of the music, dance, and songs that came out of enslaved Africans and later free black American people. So that's just, like I said, a fraction of it. But we also have to talk about the importance of how music helped save African/Black American people during this time and since then. If you took Katrina's and I's blues class, we constantly hammered home the importance of listening and connecting to the music. And back during slavery and soon after slavery, there were three different types of music that was really important and crucial to the development of the blues and jazz and rock and music later on. The three that I consider important were Negro spirituals, work songs, and field hollers. And the little birdie fly away. Okay, so Negro spirituals, for those who might not know, is a type of religious folk song that is the most closely associated with enslaved African people in the American South. All right, Negro spirituals constitutes one of the largest and most significant forms of American folk song. Negro spirituals were used in scriptures and hymns from inspiration from the Christian Bible, and they use words in the Bible they use as codes to help either themselves, other people, or other groups of people escape their enslavement and to go up north or out west to free territories. Negro spirituals also kept the plantation owner, the plantation overseer, white or black, and the house slaves. It kept them kind of in the dark to what was really happening out in the field, right? So you have to have that code. Because if the slave person ran away, and the plantation owner or the plantation overseer asked, let's say, a house slave, hey, did you know about so-and-so leaving? And that person just happened to say yes. That house slave would get just as much trouble, if not worse, as someone who ran away. So having that code and having those hidden messages was very crucial and important, because if you were a house slave, you had better clothing, maybe a little bit better food, and possibly a place of better shelter than a field slave. So if you were kind of in that position, some people just didn't want to risk losing that status in a sense, right? So that's why the codes were very important to keep hidden. Also, another aspect of the Negro spirituals were really utilizing the Underground Railroad. And as we know, the Underground Railroads were a series of paths that enslaved people could take to get to Spanish Florida, which was not part of the plantation system in the sense of the American colonies. Out west, you see Texas, Iowa, things like that, and definitely up north to places like Pennsylvania and Ohio and Indiana and things like that. Any questions so far? Good? All right. So some notable Negro spirituals: Wade in the Water, Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, Go Down Moses, Steal Away, Down by the Riverside, Joshua Fit the Battle of Jericho, Sometimes I Feel Like a Motherless Child, and Nobody Knows the Trouble I've Seen. All of these songs and many more spiritual songs or gospel songs, all these songs had hidden messages in it to help people escape the situation that they were in, right? And some of these songs are songs that are still sung to this day, because it was a passed down oral tradition. Next to our work songs and field hollers, which were completely different in a sense from Negro spirituals. Work songs during the 16th and 1700s, enslaved Africans had many ways to express their toil and pain through song and hollering, which manifested into the concept of field hollers and work songs. It consisted of heavy accented and alternating beats, which helped with the synchronization of the labor at hand. Work songs also had secret messages in it, Bible stories, and uplifting words. Field hollers were songs that were used to communicate to other enslaved people, like, hey, stop slacking, the plantation owners here, or the plantation overseers here, get back to work type of situation. So it was really a lot of coded message in that as well. And these field hollers used the expression of cries to express like pain, sorrow, loneliness, or hunger. And I'm going to add to it, it also later on became, expression of of happiness, of enjoyment, of celebration, and also of defiance. So, once again, connecting and listening to the music, two values that I also talk about a lot as well. By doing this, by connecting and listening to the music, it allowed enslaved Africans to hold on to one of the few things that the European enslavers could not take away at that time, which was some of the cultures, some of the music, songs, and dance. Through connecting and listening to the music, enslaved people were able to use the words, like I said, in the Bible as coded message to help themselves escape their enslavement to freedom. Also connecting and listening to the music in a world that were telling enslaved Africans and later freed Black American people that they were not human, the song, music, and dance gave Black Americans a sense of self and individuality. Next, we're going to talk about safe spaces, right? Now, as you notice so far, I'm not really harping a lot on the music and the dance. I'm harping on what was going on in society, and these things that have happened in society really shapes how the music and the dance kind of came to be. So safe spaces are extremely important in Black communities. So the first kind of form of safe spaces were praise houses. And these is a tradition, once again, started during the dark days of slavery and later free Black Americans, where a lot of Black Americans were not easily permitted to travel about the country as freely as we are today. Sometimes praise houses would be administered by a trustee slave hand, plantation owner, or plantation overseer. And these praise houses kind of had like a sinister effect as well, because the reason that either the plantation owner, the plantation overseer, or even a trusted slave hand would be in these praise houses was to make sure that the enslaved people learned the Christian Bible, or albeit the slave Bible. And yes, there was such a thing called a slave Bible that basically said if you do not obey your plantation owner, then you're going to go to hell. So do whatever you can to appease your plantation owner, because if or when you die, then you will be sent to heaven. And this was a thing that was passed around. Another role of praise houses on some plantations, because each plantation differed in how it operated, some praise houses actually did, business as in like determining what role other enslaved people would have on said plantation. And also, it was just a place where you could share news, share stories of what was going on in the bigger outside world. Another form of safe spaces in the early beginning were bush meetings and hush harbors. Now, these were gatherings that were held in the cover of darkness, away from the formal worshiping, organized and overseen by the slave masters. And any enslaved person that risked going to these and they were caught risked the chance of being beaten and or killed if caught. And these meetings were intentionally held in secluded places like ravines, woods, and areas with lots of brushes to provide cover, or to provide cover for the sound and stuff like that. Now, I wanted to show you a ring shout from Georgia Geechee Gully Singers, which is one of the oldest forms of groups that still adheres to the tradition of singing Negro spirituals. But this place doesn't have really good internet connection, so I couldn't get onto YouTube. And so we won't be able to see that, unfortunately. All right, other safe spaces later on: juke joints or burrow houses, rent parties, family gatherings, dance halls, playgrounds, community centers, bars, clubs, cookouts. All of these safe spaces were a place to come together to support each other during times of being treated as inhuman. These safe spaces allowed enslaved Africans and later free Black Americans to express themselves individually in a world that was or is saying that you are ugly, uneducated, dirty, can't speak properly. These spaces were a place to celebrate all of the accomplishments that we have achieved as a people, despite all the obstacles that were intentionally placed before us. It was a place for us to fight for positive change and equality in society, to support each other emotionally, mentally, and physically, to encourage us to push each other to be better and to keep striving for success. And it was a place for us to express ourselves or themselves creatively through music, singing, dancing, writing, painting, you name it. So the next aspect is being proud and telling our story as a people, right? And that story, once again, includes the inhumane treatment, right? Being sold off, having our family members, having our child sold off, having posters that saying, capture this individual. Later, during Reconstruction and moving forward, the unwanting and killing of innocent black people for doing something as bumping into a white person, or heaven forbid, looking at a white person, especially a white woman at the time. Stopping, people from educating each other, living in a neighborhood with a white person, having towns or cities buried underwater or just completely eradicated because, heaven forbid, black people get just basic equality of education and life of living. Like I said, going to school and just the constant mistreatment of black bodies. Next, we have to talk about the dangerous stereotypes, right? And some of these we do know, but the main biggest one is, blackface, or, get a bar of soap and because you're so dirty that you just wash that off and you're a clean person again. Always having signs that says, round blacks, never relax, a picture of Birth of a Nation in the bottom corner there. Being overly aggressive, we loving our watermelons, even though there's nothing racial about watermelons, because everybody freaking loves watermelons. Or this right here with the top, your top left corner, right? It's the constant, just negative stereotypes after negative stereotypes. And this is what the majority of American population was seeing on a daily basis. Then we have our defiance in the face of adversities. And that defiance means taking a chance, risking your life to just get away and to have a better life for yourself, for your family, and for future generation of your kids. Defiance, and even though we were told that we can't enjoy ourselves, we can't celebrate, we're going to find a way to celebrate our life, celebrate what we have in a world that's telling us that we don't have anything. And escape into a place where you can just be who you are, right? Fighting for equality, just in lines of education, in lines of just being able to work at a job, to be able to just buy things, at a department store, wherever you are. All these things were defying the laws at the time and just saying we are not going to go anywhere. We want to fight for justice for everybody involved, not just for us, but for everybody who was facing, oppression in some way, shape, or form. Then we have to talk about our pride and achievement as a people, right? All the things that came to be in the military, in politics, or in media, right? Our pride and achievement just to kind of come together and celebrate with each other, right? Our communities, having achievement in education, in the workforce, and obviously on the silver screen, and just dressing to the nines to show that we are not all of these negative things that people like to say we are or were. So, whenever I say blues and jazz music is a Black American culture, music and dance form, what I really mean is that it is influenced by so many Black people of the Black diaspora, right? From West Africa, where the majority of enslaved people were taken, stolen, traded, and all that horrible stuff. From South America to Brazil to the Caribbean islands, all of those influences, right, provided and gave spark to what we have today, to the clothes, to the fashion, to the music, along with instruments from Africa to European style of music, to Caribbean style of music. All of that helped form blues and jazz music today. So that's why when I say it's a Black American culture art form, it is influenced by so many people that came to this country whether unfortunately during slavery or even afterwards, just moving about, right? It's the migration of people going all over the place and taking their local custom in music and dance and sharing it with another part of the country. And then building upon that and growing that. And that is why blues and jazz music belongs to Black American culture, because it is the story of us as a people. And that is the one thing that I feel that a lot of people in the dance scene never really quite understood or understands, maybe possibly to this day. That it is getting better. There are people that are really, shedding light on the fact that this is a cultural art form, and I'm hoping that whenever they do give these type of talks, they're not just only talking about the Savoy Ballroom and how great and wonderful it was, even though there are people that have issues with why people go into the Savoy Ballroom. But it isn't just always rose-colored glasses. There is a touch of, hey, let's actually talk about societal, what was going on, and how that affected, and how that affects how we express ourselves through music and dance. And that is the end of the talk. So, with that being said, questions, comments, observations? Yes?
You mentioned at the beginning that enslaved people did not have ownership over their own music and cultural dances and things. How did that influence? I don't know if you're looking at this or not. How does that show up in the music today, or how did that influence how these musics were shared between peoples, like you were just talking about?
So how that was shared was there was some form of sharing going on if other people came to and from and stuff like that, right? There's a lot of selling of enslaved people, but just also enslaved people coming with their slave owners to other plantations and stuff like that, right? But also too, there was, sorry about that. There were starting to become written documentations of some of these songs and things like that. One of the most famous ones is named after the law Jim Crow. It was named after a guy named Jim Crow, and so there was some written record of some of these Negro spirituals and things like that, and that have been documented throughout history at the time. So that's how it also got shared as well, if that's what your question was. Yeah. Any other question, comments, observations? Yes.
Relating to the same thing. I guess what I saw about the question that I had was, in that time, were there ever slave owners who did try to capitalize on that sort of art that enslaved people were thinking? Were they the ones trying to? Did they try to do anything with that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So have you guys heard of Al Jolson and the movie The Jazz Singer? Al Jolson. He was a 1920s, 30s vaudevillian actor, entertainer. I can't remember the exact dates of him, but he did a very, it might have been the 40s actually. It might have been 40s, but he did a very interesting piece, a song called Mammy. And this was a time when talkies were starting to be introduced to theaters, because before then, going on to the question of capitalization, yes, and things like vaudeville, right, or not vaudeville, like vaudeville. The circuit, right, or the Chitlin circuit, right, which was a form of traveling entertainment shows and things like that, right? And at that time, Black people could not be performing on stage, so you had a lot of white people donning blackface, to represent Black people, right? Mostly enslaved Black people, right? So dirty clothes, tore up clothes, don't know how to quote unquote speak properly. Hair's always in some weird pigtail kind of concoction, and basically just this is what we think black people are. So it kind of contributed to that negative, dangerous connotation of black American people or black enslaved black people at the time. So you had those kind of to start off with. And then as technology or entertainment developed, it kind of moved to more prominent mediums like film and then music with like race records and things like that. So there's always been a capitalization of black music by white people in this country. So yes, is the answer to your question. Yeah. And yes.
As a newcomer, I was swing dancing in the 2000s. Can you give us a little history as to what that difficulty was that you went through with Europeans?
Yeah. Oh, the sweets. So it's a super long story because I can't say anything very shortly. But what happened was, and this even happened started before 2020, but I made a post around 2018 because I looked a while back ago, asking the simple question of why do we look at Lindy Hop through rose-colored glasses or the jazz age through rose-colored glasses? And that really got people upset because it was basically the excuse that we get a lot of times when marginalized people bring up something very serious that needs to be drawn to. One of the question is, why do you always got to bring race into it, or why does politics always have to be brought into it? Why can't people just dance for the sake of dancing, right? And without understanding that black bodies has always been intertwined with politics, literally, because the institution of slavery was a political law. So whenever we bring these things up, we either get dismissed, we either get gaslit beyond imagine, or we're told just to shut up and just enjoy the fact that white people are saving the dance, right? Yeah, I know. White people are saving the dance. And around 2020, it really came ahead because of an action of one particular individual, and it really came to head because it just got to a point of people literally saying, we don't care about, well, the way that how I saw it, I'm not going to speak for everybody else, how I interpret that time period of hearing international dancers say, we don't give a damn about your culture. We don't care about the culture. We just value the music and the dance that you have produced as a culture. But we don't care about anything else. Just show us the dance steps, show us the choreography, show us the pattern, and let that be that, right? And I'm a very outspoken individual, and I was like, no, this is not gonna happen. And I knew a lot already because I'm a huge nerd of history, so I knew a lot at that point. But the more I started doing even deep dive and research, it's just like a lot more stuff that I really didn't know came from oh, that's pretty interesting. I didn't know that before. And because the Europeans, for the longest time, have never been told that the culture is important, right? From instructors. And I'm going to say white and black instructors, okay? I'm going to say that. I know I'm going to get in trouble for saying it. I'm going to say it. A lot of black and white instructors at the time, I felt never really talked about how normal everyday life affected how we expressed ourselves. They didn't bother to talk about the values of our culture. And because a lot of instructors, when they were coming up, were never told about it either. Because they were basically told that isn't important. Just focus on this music and dance. That's all people want to know. Just teach us the dance steps, teach us the patterns. You know, what's this measure of music? What type of 4/4 count or 2/4 count is this? And that's it. And without understanding that there's more to it than just dance steps and patterns and choreography, there's an essence behind it. So And so that's a small fraction of it. I can get into more in detail later on, but there's, yeah. So that was my personal beef with that, and I got yelled at a lot, and I got told that I ruined a dance scene in a state that I'd never been in before. It was, yeah, exactly. Yeah, so it was interesting to say the least. It was interesting to say the least. Yes.
Question, or comment question. It's interesting that it seems like nowadays when I follow Laura Blake's instructor online and Bobby White, who's done a lot with history, and they seem to do a lot to promote Lindy Hop as a black art form. And also one of my favorite books though is Frankie Manning's autobiography. And what's interesting is I don't see the same language. You know, obviously he brings up the context that, you know, he could go perform at the Cotton Club, but then he couldn't then sit in the crowd. You know, at the same time, some things worked the other way. There were a couple white dancers who got to the level of the Cat's Corner, but then they couldn't perform because if you integrate a dance troupe, then that was just, I'm sure people at the Savoy couldn't care much, but they're like, no, we're not going to touch that. I guess what I'm trying to say is Frankie didn't seem to view the dance, as I read his book, in the same words as Laura or Bobby White. He kind of came at that message where it was a special, obviously the majority of the dancers were black, but he kind of said that it was a special place because it was one of the few ballrooms that wasn't integrated. And his language is often, it's not about the color of your skin or if you're rich or poor or if you're famous or common, but it's about do you want to dance? And it seems to be something in society today where there's kind of a debate over how to view public policy through different lenses. That Frankie's, what he said seems to be different from what I'm hearing from Laura. I'm trying to reconcile it. I'm curious your thoughts. I spent a lot of time thinking about it because it's just different language in the book.
Yeah, I've had this conversation a lot with people. And this is one of my, it was strongly, and it still is one of my biggest frustration with the dance scene as a collective whole. It's the weaponization of Frankie Manning.
What way?
In the sense of whenever particularly a black American said, hey, it wasn't all great, right? It wasn't all great for everybody. There were black Americans who went to the Savoy Ballroom that did not like that white people could go to the Savoy Ballroom because they could not go to other places, literally. They could not go to Midtown or downtown Manhattan. They couldn't go to, even clubs in Harlem they could not go to because it was segregated, you know? So the fact that a white person from Brooklyn, Bronx, Illinois, Philadelphia, Jersey could just come down to the Savoy Ballroom and act like it's a playground for a night or the weekend and go to the Cotton Club, which was named to appease Southern white people that came up to New York and couldn't even go in there as a citizen of Harlem or as residents of Harlem. And then we have this place that is ours, and yet white people can come here. It upset a lot of black people. And just because Frankie Manning didn't have a problem with it, and that's his viewpoint, and he's allowed to have his viewpoints and opinions. But what really irked me was how international dancers and even American dancers used Frankie Manning as a weapon to gaslight some black Americans that was willing to speak out and say, no, it wasn't all this great. If you're apolitical as a person, great. Be apolitical as a person. But don't automatically assume just because you don't care if white people were at the Savoy Ballroom doesn't mean that other black people didn't care either, right? So, and that was my big irk because that's all we ever hear is Frankie Manning's name dropped a million times in a sentence at a dance event, you know? Frankie Manning, that great person, great dancer. I never met him personally myself, so I can't speak to him as an individual person. He's done a lot for the promotion of Lindy Hop, but so did Norman Miller, so did Al Mims, so did Leon James, so did every member of Whitey's Lindy Hoppers, but yeah, you only heard about Frankie Manning, you know? And that's what I mean by like, and they treated Frankie Manning as Black American culture, you know? Whatever he said, if anybody else said anything different, no, it didn't matter, right? So either you agreed with him or you didn't. That's how people looked at it, right? Whether or not he did it himself, I don't know. Once again, I never met the guy in person, never talked to him. So this isn't an attack on him as a character, as a person. It's how people treated him and put him on this godlike deity pedal. And it's like, dude, he doesn't speak for all Black American people, right? And that was my issue with that, right? So you have to look at him as an individual. Individually, he might not have focused on that too much as a person. And that's his choice, that's his opinion. He's a free person to think however he wanted to think. But don't just automatically assume or make the presumption that, or since he didn't care, that no other Black person didn't care, because that is not the case. And it gets into this whole monolith type of notion, right? We all have a hive mind. There are things as a culture that we agree on that's like pretty messed up and that should never happen, but there are a lot of things that we disagree on. There are a lot of Black American dancers in the scene that I might not agree with everything that they say, or even everything that they do on how they teach something, you know? And I have every right to have that feeling, and they have every right to disagree with everything that I say or do whenever I teach or talk about Black American culture at a dance event, right? And it's okay for that to happen, right? So, and that's the richness of our culture, is because we have so many different opinions and viewpoints based on our own personal lived experience. And those personal lived experience adds value just as much as your top level dancer does, right? So that was my big irk with international dancers as a whole, and even American dancers as a whole, was this deification of Frankie Manning, and no one else mattered, no one else in the culture mattered if they didn't agree with him, you know?
That's not what I'm saying.
Yeah. I know that's not what you're saying, but it's that sense of like the weaponization of Frankie Manning to dismiss other Black people's opinions and viewpoints that did not share his opinions and viewpoints. And to answer your question with that is, he is an individual person. And that is why it's very important to look at the bigger picture and realize that, oh, hey, okay, I get it, he didn't mind that, but I'm sure, I know that other people did have an issue with white people coming into this war ballroom, given the social environment at that time with segregation and all of the horrible things that came from it. If that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. I didn't know that was a point of contention, that there were white dancers in support. So that's new.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so white people could, you know, if they risked it and felt brave and bold, went up to Harlem to dance at the Savoy Ballroom, and you know, yeah. So it was open to be integrated. So it wasn't like they forced their way in. It was meant to be an integrated space from the beginning, you know. So that's good. That is a very good thing. But just because it was meant to be that way from the beginning, still doesn't mean that people didn't, you know. So it still didn't mean that people were automatically accepting to that. Like there were people that really did not like that, you know, from the very beginning, right? Yeah. There's another hand that I saw went up somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, it all has, its context is key.
Yes.
Like where all these people are coming at. You spoke of a biographical component.
Mm-hmm.
This is, you know, Frankie's one experience of his moment in time that he wanted to share.
Mm-hmm.
He may not have shared everything, we don't know. And then you have reference to instructors that didn't have a lived experience, but they've done the research.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why you're getting different stories, different opinions, because, you know, as Odysseus shared at the beginning, that, you know, he is a Black person, that these are his views, not speaking for all of Black America or, you know, all of Blackness in general. So you have to take context is key and do your own research.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and another thing, and to piggyback off of that too, is whenever the history of any culture is talked about, it's talked about in a way that is kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Absolute language, right? It's like it was this, it was that, you know? Like, no, this is how you do this movement, you know? It's talking in a very absolute tone. And what we as just humans in general need sometimes forget is that, like, no, you're talking about how you understand it, you know? Like this is your opinion, your viewpoint. And that's fine. Once again, everybody's allowed to have their own opinions and viewpoints. But when you're trying to help educate other people about another culture group to which you are participating in, you have to be very careful on how you say things, how you word things, how you explain things, because it's like you can't just say that, yes, nobody had an issue with people going to this ballroom, because Frankie didn't have issues with people going to this ballroom. That is, to me, is a very dangerous statement to make, because you're making it sound like that sounds like a monolithic statement, and it seems like that, once again, nobody had a problem, when there are people that have problems with it, you know? And I mean, still to this day, like a great dancer, Sonny Allen, who I will pick the brain of all the time a couple of years ago, he told me that, yeah, like there were people that had issues with white people going up to the Savoy Ballroom, you know? And he told me in person that he did. So once again, and I was just with you when I read the biography, or I audiobook, listened to the biography, but I listened to it, exact same thing, you know? It's like, what is this notion of this godlike obsession with one person who is one representative of the culture, but yet there's nothing else that people talk about the culture? Do they know about the culture? And if you remember from his book, he literally talked about how he would, in some of his performance routines, he would literally give moments in a choreography to have the dancers do their own thing, be their own person, be their own individual. But the way that you hear people talk about him, that never happened, you know? So after I listened to that book, I got even more upset at dance instructors in general, just after I read that book. But it is a thing, that's going back to what the young lady in the back said, it's very important for us to take a step back and just do, like, research as much as we can respectfully, you know? Because
there's a lot of opinions, a lot of perspectives, and you can't do anything as monolithic or someone else.
Exactly, and all those opinions and perspectives, whether you disagree with them or not, are valid in their own way. Yeah. Yes, question.
Well, kind of a comment, I guess.
Mhm.
So, one of the things that I see being left out of the conversation is personality, and a lot of discussion here about Frankie. I took a number of classes from Frankie, and he was always like very friendly. I mean, it was a personality that you met him, and hey, this is a nice person. And so I think personality plays in there too, as far as, you know, where his perspective was.
Oh, yeah.
How people liked him,
Mhm.
just because of the person he was.
Yeah, and that's perfectly fine. You know, like I never, you know, got upset with somebody because they like me because of his personality. Where my thing was just kind of like, you're justifying basically ignoring the whole entire culture because, you know, you're clinging on to someone that has this great personality that says that they didn't care that politics, being involved in politics and social issues wasn't his thing. You know, once again, that is his choice, and he had every right to that choice. But then to use that persona of his to literally, you know, gaslight other Black Americans that was trying to raise awareness and issues around things, that is where I have the problem with, you know, because he doesn't make up the whole entire culture. It's a collection of us that this music and dance came from. It didn't just come from one person. And that was my reason behind all that statement. Any other comments, questions, observations?
I did have one question.
Yeah.
And this is just generally, so we talked a lot about, we know a lot about this with slavery, just the restrictions and smaller crowds and stuff. When did Lindy and Blues start to actually develop, when the crowds could get a little bigger, when people had private spaces? And in slavery,
What the crowded spaces?
Well, how did it develop? Because, I mean, it was really restrictive, especially, before the Civil War, slaves were very separated out. So where did this actually come from in terms of music and the dance and that cultural aspect of slaves getting together?
Wow, that is another 5-hour lecture talk in itself. No, all right, so blues music came after slavery, after 1865, when slavery was over, but it was really 2 years later, Juneteenth and all that, and all that good stuff. The music of blues really kind of came about around 1920s, between 1900s and 1920s, and the first form of blues was actually jazz music. First iteration of blues music was jazz music. And the person that pioneered that, which very few people know, which I didn't know till really like a couple weeks ago, was a woman by the name of Mamie Dejoun. And she was one of the first person to give us, to kind of start that sound of blues music. Followed next by Jelly Roll Morton, because Jelly Roll Morton's family was neighbors with the Dejoun family at that time. So he learned the sound from her. Unfortunately, we don't have any recording because this was before recordings was a thing, unfortunately. But, and then from there we have other key figures who helped really evolve the music and dance. And this was all before Robert Johnson came to be. And we always credit Robert Johnson as being the godfather of blues music or some type of starter of blues music, but there were tons of people before him. And so blues came before jazz. It's really confusing, actually, when you really think about it. But blues came before jazz. So blues came first, but it was two jazz music, because a lot of early ragtime jazz have blues in the title, right? So a lot of people back then thought that, no, we're playing the blues. It just has a jazzy sound to it. Now, where the musical transition happens, that happens a little bit later, and there is a divide from what we know today as blues and jazz, right? But early jazz stuff was blues music. And I thought I knew, but now I learned something new. I'm just like, well, I need to rethink this whole entire thing, and that just hurts my brain even more. But it's important to always go into it with open mind of okay, I'm gonna stumble upon some connected dot moments that's really gonna question what I thought before. And that's a good thing, because it just makes you realize that we still have so much more to learn about the culture, about the history of the music itself, the people that really helped push it, what was going on in society at the time that caused the creation of this. All of this really all of this contributes to the creation of the music and dance that we are participating in to this day, and what has always been the catalyst to future later genres of music like your rock and roll and your pop music and your soul and your Motown and your funk and your R&B and your country music that that people are arguing about today, right? So that's in a nutshell, extreme nutshell, the history of that. But there's so much more to that that we can definitely go into and talk about later as well. Yes.
Did you just say the name of the woman who was the original blues?
Yes. So once again, this is my understanding of it. Okay. So I don't want to say that she was it, but this is how I understand it. But her name was Mamie Dejoun. So Desdunes. And she is the father of an early civil rights leader during between 1900s and 1920s. I can't remember the exact dates of when she was born, but her father was a prominent civil rights leader even before we know of our modern civil rights leader today. the history of early blues also goes back to French Creole people. And where we got the term, okay, a quick story. Quick story. So, blues music, okay, came from a Puritan law called the Blue Laws, okay, all right? And you can read all of this in the blues from Chris Thomas King, I believe his name is, but it's called The Blues, the story, the authentic story of the music of my culture. And Puritan laws called blue laws, and these blue laws were like one of them was if you missed church for 3 Sundays in a row, you would be put to death, right? Very strict Puritan laws, okay? So the Delta region, Louisiana area, wasn't as populated as we know it as it is today, right? It was still very swampland and stuff like that. So when that part of the country opened up, I think it might have been after the purchase of the Louisiana Purchase and stuff like that, where you had a lot more people coming down into the areas from the States and stuff like that, and people just coming in overseas. And these Puritans would see these French Creole people, celebrating, having a good time, doing their cultural dances, and looking going, oh, that's ungodly, that's heathenistic, that's barbaric, all the negative terms, right? Sinful, thank you. Sinful, right? It's all very sinful. And a lot of French Creole people couldn't say the word blue from the English, they bleu, and they then kind of mocked that law by saying, sacre bleu, oh, blah, blah. And then that kind of transformed, and when the music started playing, they kind of used this word for blue laws to kind of describe hey, I'm just playing this sinful music, so, playing like sacre bleu music and stuff like that. So sinful music, so that's where we get the term blues music. And I know, right? Crazy. Mind blown. So, but it's little things like that. You're like, interesting. Once again, politics played a role into the creation of later a really prominent music style, right? So it's hard, so you can't ever say leave politics out of dance or leave politics out of music, because the governing of black bodies has always been strongly linked to politics and policies and laws, right? And whenever someone says that, I see it as a huge slap in the face, because that tells me you do not understand our culture. You don't understand our values as a culture. You don't understand our practices as a culture, because it's always strongly tied to, once again, what was happening in society on a daily basis for black people, enslaved people, free black people, later African Americans, modern day black American people, stuff like that. It's always been a thing. And also other cultural groups too that were oppressed in America at that time, within certain time periods. So so having these type of talks is always think it's important, and I always encourage you to attend them by any means, always attend them, because you will always learn something new from them, and it also just gives you a better appreciation of the art form that you're doing, that you're participating in. And it also helps you become better allies in your own way. Because if you're somewhere else and then someone says something completely out of hand, you can be like, actually, no, let's not go there. I might not know much about it, but at least know that that's not a thing, and we shouldn't exacerbate or continue this narrative or a narrative around the culture, right? So that's why I do these talks, and that's why, for me at least, I always try to teach my classes based off of the cultural understanding and values, because it's a part of this, part of the essence of what we're participating in. Thank you. Any other questions, comments, observations?
Thanks for doing the lecture.
No, thank you. Yes, yes. So with that being said, I'm gonna end it. Thank you all very, very, very much for being here. In a couple of minutes, going to go ahead and start Blues for Lindy Hopper's class. So if you want to be here for that, you can definitely stay. If not, I think that there might be a drop-in lesson downstairs as well for Lindy Hop. So once again, thank you very much for attending, and I look forward to seeing you all on the dance floor. Thank you.